Scripture reading today will be taken from Luke 10, verses 38 and 39. Now it came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word.
Good morning to everyone. Before we get started, I want to thank David. I went to him earlier this week and asked him if he thought it'd be all right if I spoke today. And of course he encouraged me to do so, as long as check that with the elders and stuff, and that's what we did, and I appreciate him allowing me to do that. Or he said he was happy for me to do that. I had to tackle him in the hall out there to get the mic away from him. Y'all know how hard it is to get a mic away from a preacher. But we finally wrestled it away and got it. This morning we're going to look at Luke chapter 10, very common story. But hopefully, if you've looked at your handout, urgent versus important. That's what we're going to be talking about for the most part of this lesson. And look at some points here that maybe will help us a little bit. You know, I was probably around 5 or 6 years old when I started to figure out urgent, important, and even time. Time was one of those things that we start to understand at that age. We understand seconds and minutes, hours, our perception of how much time had passed. You know, and then soon after that we start to develop our habits. We start to make decisions on how we're going to use our time. And when we're in those developmental stages, others usually dictate to us how we're going to use that time, how we're going to spend that time. And then we start to grow into teenagers and professionals, and we have more freedom with that opportunity of our time. And then we develop our own personal system that we start to put together of spending our time, and sometimes we're successful at that, and sometimes we're not so successful. So each one of us has to decide how we're going to use our time most effectively. Now, in this decision process, things get tricky. We're tricked into thinking that tasks are important when actually they're not. Often, we may delay the most important decisions, the most important items that are on our list, because maybe they're often the hardest decisions. So, we start to confuse what's urgent and what's important. There's a crucial distinction between the two, and these things could affect our final destination. As I mentioned, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was not a big fan of the school system. That was not high on my priority list. And I was at a babysitter's, and that was where my parents dropped me off. And each day, she would send me outside right before time the bus would arrive. And I would have to go across the street and wait. That bus would pull up, I would get on the bus, and off to kindergarten I went. This day, I decided there was more important things to do. There was more urgent things to do. So as she sent me outside, I watched her. She normally stood at the door and watched me every moment that I'm standing there. Waited till the bus to arrive and watched me get on it. Today, something happened. She wasn't standing at the door watching me, and I heard the bus coming around the curve. So I hopped across the ditch. I hunkered down in the grass, and there I sat. Bus pulls up, and the driver could have clearly seen me, but he never looked that way. He didn't see me standing there. He looked towards the house. What do the bus drivers do? Honk the horn, sit there for a few minutes. They're in a hurry too, right? Away he went, and he left. There I sat in the bushes, across the street, in late August, and you know, it started getting hot pretty quick. And I decided, well, since I'd missed the bus, I need to get back to the house. I'm going to go in the house. I'm going to get some water. You know, I thought, it's got to be nearly lunch. It's got to be. I've been sitting here for hours. I'll go back in the door, and the babysitter looks at me, and she, what are you doing here? What happened? Did you miss the... I said, I missed the bus. But you was... I said, well, I didn't really explain it well. She didn't take it well. I figured out what the word urgent meant. She called my daddy immediately. And by the way, it's 10 to 8, y'all, okay? I'd been there for maybe 15 minutes. When my dad arrived, he grabbed me, jumped in the car, and I thought, boy, he was kind of driving pretty fast. This is urgent. This is important, something that I've got to be at. I've got to be here. And as we flew past the school, I thought, boy, this is really urgent. Because we had to go past the school to go back to my house. So he carried me home first. And this is where the story gets kind of blurry. I don't remember a lot after that point. I don't know if, as an adult now, I've blocked out those childhood memories of what happened in that moment that we went home. I've got a good idea. And I honestly do not remember. But I do remember the last words that were said to me as I was getting ready to go into the school. Dry that up or I'm going to give you something to cry about again. So I understood it's important that I go to school. It's important that I finish school. And it's urgent that I'm there every day. So here's our definitions. Urgent is an item that demands our immediate attention. Me missing that school bus was an item that it was an urgent something for me to be at. Important is an item that affects your long-term goals and your strategy. So keep those two thoughts in mind as we run through our lesson this morning. Now, if you read Luke chapter 10, you kind of understand this story may seem a little bit out of place from where it's put in here, but the scriptures record this disagreement between the two sisters. As we set up the story here, Jesus had entered the village. A woman named Martha welcomed Jesus into her house. Now consider for a moment the pressure that Martha is probably under here. Jesus is coming to your house. Some of you understand this idea. I can even remember as a child when you had the preacher over to the house. I know how my mother, spent hours preparing the house. Everything had to be ready. Preparing the meal, going to the store, all the things. You want your guests comfortable. So here Martha's in this situation. And maybe here in this story, maybe it's Jesus plus the apostles. And if you read back in this text, maybe it's the 72 that's come back as well. There could be lots of people outside. So you want everything to be perfect. It's a big day. So you would have to think in this story that Mary and Martha, they had a plan. We have Brother Wayne Miller coming in just a week or two. There's plans in place. He has places to stay. He has meals. So this is the idea that's going on. It's a stressful situation for her. This is where it kind of starts to get interesting. Martha is running around the house and she's trying to get everything ready. You can imagine maybe there's smoke coming out of the kitchen. There's pots that's clanging. There's all these things that's going on. It's a frenzied pace for her to prepare this meal that she's trying to prepare. And where is Mary? Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus. She's listening to him teach. Now, most of you ladies can relate to this in several different ways. Can you see Martha peeking around maybe the corner of the kitchen? She's looking. I'm in here in the kitchen. I'm killing myself. I'm trying to get this stuff ready. You can kind of hear those thoughts running through her head. Maybe you've heard this one before. It sure would be nice if I had a little help in here. I use that one all the time when I do something. Sure would be nice if you'd help me. Why isn't my lazy sister helping me? Wish I could be in there listening to Jesus, but instead, no. Somebody has to get this meal prepared. So finally here, Martha, she can't keep it inside her any longer. She's done got tore up. In verse number 40 there, if you look at it, she said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve all alone? Would you please tell her to come and help me? This is pretty strong words here that Martha used towards Jesus. Don't you care about me? Can you imagine saying this to Jesus himself? You're sitting there and you say, Jesus, don't you care about me? Martha here is claiming an injustice has happened to her. And she sees it as Jesus is not, he don't care about what she's going through, that she's being mistreated in this moment. Tell my sister. Martha thinks Jesus is going to be on her side here. Send Mary to help me. There's things that need to be done if we're going to eat. But Martha, she gets an unexpected results, I think. Have you ever noticed, though? I've noticed this on several occasions, that it never works out for the person who's trying to tell Jesus to tell another person what to do. We try to take his place. We try to make recommendations to Jesus and God. Look what he said. Verses 41 and 42. He said, but the Lord answered her. Can you hear this one? Martha, Martha, why are you so anxious? Troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. You know that Martha expected Jesus to say, Mary, please be a good servant. Go help your sister. But instead, he tells her she's wrong, that Mary's made a better choice. Just a couple of weeks ago, me and Mandy was on our way back from Cherokee. We'd been to Cherokee that morning, worship service, and she was on her phone, and she pulled up this little thing. Y'all might have heard of the Dizzy Dean tournament was going on in Starkville, Mississippi 2 weeks ago on a Sunday morning. Kind of became a little social media kind of a buzz thing. The articles in the paper, this team from Starkville was playing a team from Choctaw. They was in the losers bracket on Sunday morning. The game time was 11 o'clock Sunday morning. The game actually started with a roster of 9 players. You're supposed to have 10 according to the Dizzy Dean rule book. But if you start a game with 9, you're supposed to be able to complete it with 9. But anyway, the decision had been made at some point in time. They only had 9. The 2 previous coaches had talked before. They understood some of the rules and some of the things that was going to happen, but the adults stepped in, made a decision, canceled the game, and the reason they canceled the game was that one of those young men from the Starkville Stars 8 and under baseball team, his parents had decided on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock they were going to be at church. His team ended up forfeiting. Can you imagine the pressure coming from the community, coming from your team? Now, as you read these stories, it depends on which viewpoint you read it from. There's a little bit of 2 different stories, but now his team, his coaches were in support of him going to church. And I was so proud to see that this story actually took place, and encouraged to see that his coach did not have a problem with this young man and his family doing what he's doing. The people on social media did not have a negative response to what this young man chose to do. But what it did, it was an awful big teaching moment for that young man. It was an awful big teaching point for a lot of adults. You see, they chose what was important that day over what was urgent. That's what we get to do. We have to make a decision between urgent and important. You see, the problem here in this story that Jesus gave us was that Mary did not understand what needed to be done. The problem was Martha thought the urgent things were more important. She had all these pressing issues that seemed to be so important, but they weren't truly important. They were urgent, but they were not important. This is the interesting thing that happens to each one of us every single week, that the urgent things seem to take over and the things that are important get put to the wayside. Have you ever noticed important things don't clamor? They don't kick, they don't scream, they don't holler. They just kind of stand over in the corner, and the urgent things are constantly, it's got to be done now. It's got to be done now. We've got to do this now. We've got to check this now. Even to the point that it sometimes makes us we can get so tied up in things, we even get sick to our stomach sometimes. And the important things we have just quietly stand over in the corner, and we often ignore those things. They're not demanding our attention. But it's the phone calls. It's the cleaning of the house. It's the mowing the yard. It's the working in the garden. It's the housework. It's the kids. It's all these things that just clamor and holler and scream for our attention. You know, we have emails that have to be read every day. I mean, I don't know. I bet my wife gets a couple of hundred of those things a day. And they've all got to be checked. Oh, of course, I mean, we have Facebook and we have Instagram and they've got to be checked. And they have this great tendency to swallow up every bit of our attention. Yet none of these things are important. If you notice, even in this text, I've not mentioned the sin. I don't think he's talking about sin. These things are not sinful. We can allow them to separate us from, but all of these activities, they're not bad things. We're merely talking about this morning the urgent things that we allow us to take us away from the most important things. And you know, I thought as I was working on this lesson, I thought if there's ever a lesson that every single one of us could probably respond in a positive way, it would be this lesson. How many of us allow all those urgent things to take up so much of our time? Our schedules, they become so overloaded with urgent, not sinful things, important things of this life. We spend all these things, all this time on our schedules. If you look at verse 40, the word distracted comes up. But Martha was distracted with much serving. Her attention was drawn away from God by the burden of all of the duties that she felt was on her. I'm not trying to dispute the fact this morning that every single thing that Martha was trying to accomplish was not going to have to be done if they were going to eat. They had to. All of those things had to be done. But this was not the time. What things are more important than sitting at the feet of Jesus like Mary did? And then we begin to think how often we let this to affect our lives. Those urgent things. You know, our Bible reading sometimes gets disrupted because of the urgent things we do. Our prayer is non-existent because we're simply too busy to even pray. We neglect the assembling of the Christians together because we have so much to do, or even ball games. Teaching is neglected because we don't have time to spend with our friends, neighbors. I thought about this even for myself. It's amazing sometimes how important the thought of not checking my email or not checking my text messages, they scream louder to me than it does maybe to talk to God in prayer. It's been hours for some of you. May have only been a few 45 minutes since in between services that we started, since you've looked at Facebook, checked your messages, maybe you checked your email. Some of you may have even checked the weather a while ago when I heard it start raining outside. It's a habit for us. We just reach and grab, and we do those things because we think it's urgent. We think we're missing out. But you know what? Sometimes we let hours go by, we let minutes go by, we let hours, we let days without looking at our Bibles, and we never even noticed that we done it because we were so consumed with all those urgent things. What do? First things first. We have to redefine what's important to us. Carefully determine what those things are that are truly important and what those things are that are simply urgent. Only when we do this will we start to see all of those other things come into place in our life. If we don't predetermine those things that are important, then we'll continue to neglect all the important things. You can't tell me that family made the decision on 9 o'clock Sunday morning that they were going to church on Sunday. You will never convince me of that. That decision was predetermined, and it was important, and that was the way it was going to be. How do we determine which things in life are important and which things are urgent? Well, Jesus gives you the answer in verses 41 and 42. One thing is necessary: sitting at the feet of Jesus. Do we live our lives with this kind of perspective? Martha is anxious, she's troubled, she's got many things. This is according to Jesus. But only one thing is necessary. There's only one important thing, and Mary had chosen that thing. Studying the Word of God together in the Bible class or in our assemblies, sometimes it's simply not important to us. Yet we read of the first century Christians in Acts 2:42 that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship. They understood the one necessary thing, the important thing. They didn't look at things as optional. Mary had chosen the good portion here, the important thing. Unfortunately for us, sometimes it seems we let circumstances compel us to choose, and we choose the urgent things over the important things of Jesus. Disciples of Jesus don't let urgent things of life squeeze out that one important thing, Jesus. You know, just because it's not a sinful act does not mean that it could lead to be a sinful choice. Each of us has to learn we can't do everything. There is simply not enough time. We get to make choices. We have to choose, and we have to choose deliberately in our lives. You know, life's affairs will not automatically sort themselves out in some type of true order of priorities, unfortunately. We have to put who is most important, and then things will fall into place. And if we don't consistently make sitting at Jesus' feet important and listening to His Word, it won't be our number one necessity. 1,000 things, 1,000 duties, all these things screaming, kicking, hollering for us to accomplish. Don't let those things rob you of your salvation. When we get to the point of our service this morning to where we offer the invitation, we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Have we let the urgent things take place of the most important? What are we teaching those around us? What are we teaching other adults around us? What do they see in us? What do our children see in us? Who are we? We Mary, we Martha. Are we teaching them that urgent things are more important? Are we teaching them that there's only one important and necessary thing? You see, we get tons of teachable moments, I think, throughout our lifetime. opportunities to teach others, and opportunities for us to learn. Opportunities to teach our children. Will we teach them that there's one important thing? Or do we take Jesus and we set him over in the corner in a safe place? You know, somewhere where he won't get hurt. Someone where he's out of, he's not involved in all this hustle and bustle in life that we live in, and we put him over here in this little padded area and we keep him safe. He's not important. We're just trying to keep him safe, keep him in the corner. And we allow all the urgent things to surround him. What's your desire? Do you want to sit at Jesus' feet? Listen to his words? Then Jesus must take priority over the worldly concerns. Disciples of Jesus live only with one thing as necessary. Nothing in life is important except Jesus. We're a little early. Got plenty of time this morning. Do you need to respond? Have you decided this morning, since you're here, you've allowed some of those things to interfere with it? And I mentioned a lot of those things, they're not sins within themselves. They can lead to that. But I think every single one of us could probably say we've allowed the urgent things to keep us away from sitting at the feet of Jesus, which is most important. And maybe you'll pray for yourself this morning. Maybe you add that to your prayers this next week, that we'll be better at putting Jesus first in our life. Maybe you're here this morning, you've not become a Christian, and you've decided that that's an important thing, that's something I need to finish, and I need to complete that process. And if so, then it's urgent that you respond to that invitation this morning. In either instance, if you have a need, we'd love to pray for you. We'd love to assist you in whatever need that it is that you have. We ask that you respond as we stand and sing.